Just an email legislation to
I've got none.
No. I got it. I did this all myself.
Okay. Now it's all.
It's all myself.
I haven't gotten that kind of response.
That's really smart.
They always prefer to go down.
So he never responded. They just gave him the book.
I didn't know. About 6. Yeah. I had coffee with him.
I'll send you.
And he was the goal is to try to help me.
She's loading up her.
So I tried to, when I wrote something, it's like, it's not a bad.
We have a meeting no matter what, let's just finish like that.
One of them volunteered to use
I haven't said a word.
Should be more helpful if you stop talking.
This might be true, I just want to say.
I don't remember doing these two votes before. Oh, we did last year.
Oh, yes. Exactly.
So we're more in the line.
Good evening, everyone. We'll open this evening's session of the school committee with a budget hearing on the proposed FY19 budget. And Kevin Mahoney, superintendent, will give the presentation, and then after the presentation, we'll have provide an opportunity for comment by the public and any questions by the school.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Tonight is our annual FY19 public hearing on the budget proposal. As we talk about how we prepare for the process. So we remind ourselves about our guiding values, creating systems, and the key takeaways are listed here. But we do practice the professional learning community. We find that very important as we work carefully with our staff. The mantra of finding the right student for the right program for the right reason is something we've heard for the last number of years now, and it's prominent when we talk about enrollment retention. And obviously achieving a very purposeful career out themselves. We've heard Mr. Quinn talk about that. It's a value add that community and our education offers. Will do. Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. So when we looked at our school-wide goals for the beginning of the year, you know, we looked at, again, enhancing on the professional learning communities and providing opportunities for staff to professional development opportunities, setting aside professional development time to move forward on the advancement of the academy model. We've talked a number of times about how a number of faculty, a large number of faculty has stepped up, taken the lead, doing work over the summer, and on meeting times on Wednesdays, really developing the process of integrating the high-quality career and technical education programs into the overall academy. The goal here is to enhance the literacy skills, improve executive functioning, and demonstrate the connections between those disciplines that we talked about. Obviously, try and maintain a safe and supportive learning environment, and continue to enhance our investment in our application of technology for digital learning. So some of the considerations that brought us to this budget recommendation was the thought that this was the final budget that we'll be operating under in this building. This is the last one. But you know, as we considered that, there were aspects of keeping the building safe and secure, clean, but also having to take into consideration the planning requirements for the transition and moving into the new building, because that process will begin just over a year from now, as we think about it. Of course, you know, the building project is well underway, so we need to make sure that we're selling bonds to meet the cash flow requirements necessary to keep the project moving forward. So last summer, we issued $36 million worth of general obligation bonds, and we expect this fall to be issuing an additional $46 million bonds. So we had to incorporate the debt service associated with those bond sales. One of the things that as we transition during the construction phase and the financing phases, we're unable to charge the capital fee until such time as the building is occupied. So we're mindful of that when we're scheduling our debt. We're deferring some of the principal payments on that debt in order to try and defer some of that and minimize the impact on the 9 member towns supporting the project. Other consideration is a reduction in our Perkins grant funding. This is a result of the smaller districts, smaller member towns. We saw a reduction of about $81,000 in Perkins. And we've been utilizing that primarily for equipment purchases, as well as some of our professional development along the lines of the academy model development. So when we look at the budget, we break it out into two pieces. When we look at the recommendation on the fiscal 19 budget, if you look at it, excluding the debt service associated with the project, we're recommending a budget of operating budget $19,016,734, which compared to the current fiscal year, it's an increase of about 3.78%. I think when we look back on where we started, the superintendent's executive team met with the finance subcommittee early December, and we made presentations and discussed a budget request of about $19.6 million at the time. There were a number of reductions of about $572,000 worth of reductions related to building technology, equipment, and maintenance to try and bring that number down. But there were some things, as we will see in the presentation, that needed to be funded that were maintained there. When we look at the debt service associated with the building project exclusively, which we carve out for the purposes of illustration, it's about $2,143,406. And I'll point out that that's the debt service that is excluded from the Proposition 2.5 limits for the 6 communities that voted a debt exclusion override on that debt service. So, another thing that, as we move forward, that brings the total to $21,160,140 when you combine it all together, which is an increase of 11.4%. We saw this early on, and we met with the town managers and town administrators back in October, and either communicated directly to them or sent information to them. I think only 2 of the 10 managers and administrators were able to meet with us for a conversation. But we wanted to give people an early heads up that with the project moving forward, here's what to expect. And we want to make sure people are understanding what's driving the total assessments, because as we see here, 13.8 million, an increase of just under 20% is alarming when you see it on its face, but when people recognize that the majority of it is being driven by the debt service, and that in the 6 communities that's exempt from the Prop 2.5, it puts it a bit more into focus. So the total assessment breakdown can be found in your budget book on page 26. Note that this assessment total does not include the post-grad programs, nor does it include the middle school assessments. So when it comes to the vote later on in the meeting, you will note that the assessment total is a little bit high to account for those other categories. So when we look at the capital and debt, you can see that 70% of the capital and debt service that's being funded is associated strictly with the building project. This group right here. So that's a major driver. What you see up in the upper category is we're recommending $300,000 in the stabilization fund, and that's driving that subtotal a little bit. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. So when we look at the budget history the last 4 years, as we can see, we were trending a little bit downward, trying to move forward to where we wanted to be, right-sizing the school, putting ourselves in a position so that we could move forward with bringing on the debt service and reconfiguring the staff and alignments to work with the academy model. What's driving this jump is, again, the project debt service. If we didn't have the project debt service, we'd be seeing a level right around here, so just over 19 million. So that's just something to take into consideration as we move forward. So again, we continue to talk about enrollment. We continue to focus quite a bit on where we are with enrollment, so we will continue to utilize the strategies that we're finding to be making significant progress. We're still moving forward. We've also continued to engage in conversations with those non-member cities and towns on where we see would be an opportunity for those communities to consider joining the district, where we think that having access to a brand new facility where they send a number of students as it is already, in anticipation of having to incur a capital fee to send those students, there may be a cost benefit to consider joining the district at this time, and also where we see the demand and the enrollment and then an issue of access, and of course governance, that would also be to their benefit. We're trying to hit that 628 enrollment number, working hard. Last year we said we were going between 3 and 5 years. Now we're still targeting 2 to 4 years. There isn't anything that we're seeing that's going to move us off that number, at least at this point. So just to kind of take a look at the overall enrollment, and so some of you may recall seeing these in prior meetings, but you know, when we look at our overall enrollment, we see 337 in-district students and 231 out-of-district students. This chart includes the postgraduate programs. Where you see the shift is in this group here. Those represent the number from the 6 towns that withdrew from the district. So they're now considered obviously out of district, whereas in prior years they were part of the in-district enrollment. But what we're seeing is that even despite that, you know, we think that we can still continue to attract from the in-district communities. So when we kind of look underneath the admissions numbers, you know, we've seen this, you know, we're seeing an increase in freshman enrollment, still challenged by the out-of-district applications that we couldn't consider because of the regulations. But I think the takeaway here is that when we look at our freshman enrollment, we see it's pretty close to where it was the prior year, and that's considering that we're drawing from 10 towns rather than 16 towns, so we're encouraged by that. And here's the 10-year freshman enrollment to demonstrate that trend. So when we look at the revenue plan, what are some of the considerations? Those are the major categories. For our Chapter 70, the estimated increase is provided for in the governor's state budget is about $43,820. Our regional transportation reimbursement, we're expecting a decrease of about $55,000, primarily due to the fact that our transportation route system has been reduced by the smaller districts. So we expect lower costs in fiscal 18, and so the reimbursement will be less, a corresponding decrease that we can expect in fiscal 19. We're basing that reimbursement on 68% of our total expenditures in transportation next year. That's slightly higher than what we've done in the past. We've usually been around 60 to 65%, but as I looked over the last 5 years or so, that funding has creeped up a bit, and it looks like it's level funded in the state budget or recommended as level funded for next year, and we've seen 70 to 72%. So we're still slightly conservative, but reasonably comfortable that number would be pretty close. Again, it's a slight increase in our prior year tuition, the shifting of those students from member to non-member students, and the application of E&D, which is $540,000, which is less than what we were initially anticipating, but we feel as though that's a reasonable application from E&D this year. You can see the revenue plan on page 17 in the budget book as well. Some of the priorities that we took into consideration related to capital equipment planning. We've made some significant progress over the last 3 to 4 years on equipment purchases. As we've been gearing up to move into the new building, we've been rather aggressive about utilizing the Perkins funds for equipment. We've been very successful in last fiscal year and the year before. We picked up about $1.2 million from the state skills grant that we were able to move forward with our advanced manufacturing program and a number of other initiatives, so that and plus the district budget has supported replacement equipment. So a number of our shops are pretty well equipped as we prepare to move into the new building. However, we are mindful that there may be a gap, particularly with some of the new programs that will be opening up, that we're going to require some additional funding outside of the project, because the FF&E account may not be able to support that. we're cautiously optimistic, based upon the bids that we've seen so far, that we'll be able to pick up a pretty fair share of the FF&E within the construction budget, but it's holding on to say at this point, so I don't want to be premature with that. But we think that if things go the way we expect, that it'll minimize the impact and take some of the stress off the FF&E portion of the project budget. At any rate, it's still important that we fund the stabilization fund to try and offset any capital equipment costs that can't be supported within the project budget. So we're recommending $300,000 in the FY19 budget, which is $200,000 higher than what we've done over the past number of years. We've been pretty consistent with a recommendation of $100,000 to try and build up that stabilization account. And so that $200,000 is a significant number when you look at the overall increase of 3.78%. And again, we continually look for other funding opportunities, grants, and other private funding that we can use to continue to invest in our equipment needs. Some of the program changes that are included in the budget, we are closing out the telecommunications program. At the end of this school year will be the phase out that we've been planning for the last 3 years. And we'll be rolling out the multimedia engineering program. We did budget a 0.5 FTE in fiscal 18, and we're going to increase that to full funding in the FY19 budget. So in terms of staff changes, what is the impact? When we look at our compensation obligations, we'll be going into year 2 of the collective bargaining agreement with the Minuteman Faculty Association. And when we factor in the costs associated with contract as well as other non-contractual staff, we're looking at about $344,000 in compensation adjustments. And then when we look at staffing adjustments, we see a slight decrease of about $20,000. And the impacts are listed. As I mentioned, we're increasing the funding for the multimedia instructor and reducing the teaching position associated with the telecommunications program. We're also cutting a full-time administrative professional position. We found a need to add 2 positions in FY18, a data specialist position. At one point, we thought we could absorb that within multiple administrative functions, but found that there was a high level of technical and expertise that was required. We need to bring that back. And we rolled out, you may recall, the Minuteman 101 teaching program, so with that requires some additional staffing. And those are the impacts on staffing in this budget. Other major items, as I mentioned before, the $300,000 for the stabilization account. That'll bring the total balance in that fund to about $755,000, which again provides that level of support necessary in case the district needs to invest in capital equipment that can't be supported in the project. We've also set aside funding for instructional equipment and furniture. We typically earmark that for replacement, but given that we're just trying to get through one more year and recognizing that we expect to be moving into a new building that will be fairly well equipped, we're trying to minimize the investment in instructional equipment and furniture next fiscal year. However, recognizing that there will be stuff that will break and there will be equipment that may have safety concerns that we need to replace, we budgeted about $50,000 for emergency replacement in instructional equipment and furniture on an as-needed basis. In terms of transportation services, we've had a need with a couple of students for unique situations require van transportation services. So we've increased the budget by about $32,000 for that. And an analysis of our snow removal based on the the current contract, we've seen some hourly rate increases over the last couple of years, and in inserting a $10,000 increase in snow removal to recognize that. Other considerations: health insurance based on a 4% rate increase, looking at an increase of about $175,000. The Minuteman retirement system, in order to meet the funding schedule that's required under the State PARAC Commission, the funding schedule requires an increase of $50,000. So it was $2,000 in FY18 going up to $250,000 in FY19. In our utilities, we're seeing a net increase of about $15,000. This is a result of a couple of things. Primarily, we are seeing our electricity utilization, I should say our electricity costs higher in fiscal 18 than we did in prior years, in part because we went out to bid and renewed the contract late in fiscal 17, and what we're seeing is that the rates are a little bit higher than what we had the prior year. So we're adjusting the electricity account in this particular budget to reflect the increase in electricity. We're also seeing a slight decrease in the heating costs, so that's reflected in here too. The other piece that the Finance Subcommittee had a particular interest in was understanding the allocation that we use to break down our utility costs between the utilization of utilities during the day when school's in session, if you will, versus when the building's utilized off hours, nights, weekends, for private rental functions. And we took a closer look at that. About 2 or 3 years ago, we introduced a shift where we allocated 10% of those costs against the facilities revolving account. But we wanted to take another look at that to see how the utilization was running, and when we did a breakdown of the hours that we commit to private utilization of the facility, it came closer to 20%. So what we're recommending here is an allocation of 80% between the district budget and 20% against the facilities revolving fund to more accurately represent how the building's being utilized and who's paying for those costs. So as we look at the revenue plan, here's the summary on this. And just to kind of step through it, we hit on some of these, but again, what we see in Chapter 70 and reimbursement with the reduction in cost of bus transportation and our prior year tuition costs. And then when we get right down to it, the increase primarily driven by the capital, the debt service cost, brings the total revenue $21,160,040, or an increase of $2.2 million roughly. Then when we look at the breakdown of expenditures by function code, in administration, the $68,000, which is the net effect of a reduction of one full-time administrator position, offset by an add of the data specialist and some reductions we made in technology. The student instructional services primarily driven by our salary obligations. Student services is related to the transportation costs we've added, and the operation and maintenance, but in part has much to do with the snow removal and the electricity utility budget. Insurance, retirement, and leases talks to the increase primarily in our health insurance. That rate, by the way, hasn't been set. We're estimating 4%, but we expect that to be set next week. And that wraps up those categories. So. And here's just a further detail on the capital and debt service. breakdown where you can see it jumping out here at the stabilization account and at the debt service. So that wraps up the presentation. I just want to take a minute to thank the staff and the superintendent's executive team for helping us put this together. And a special thanks to the finance subcommittee for the time they spent over December and January, asking very thoughtful questions and working with us as we move forward for this recommendation.
Thank you. Are there any questions from people who are visiting tonight, from the public? This is your opportunity to ask questions about the budget. Hearing none, then we'll close the budget hearing on the proposed budget and we'll adjourn and then move on to our regular school committee meeting. Do you have now your motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Budget hearing. All in favor? Unanimous? The public hearing is, budget hearing is adjourned. We'll move right into to our regular meeting, call it to order at the meeting at 7 o'clock. And is there anyone, I don't see anyone, but if there's anyone in the gallery, as it were, would like to make a comment, public comment, you're invited to do that. Student report, yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Nice to see you all again. I'm going to start off my presentation with a summary of student achievements and fundraisers that we've been doing over the past month. And so we're going to start with Devlin E., who was just recently accepted to the Massachusetts Music Educators Northeast Junior District Orchestra. That's a very big mouthful. Devlin will have the opportunity to rehearse with renowned music educators and perform with some of the finest young musicians from Massachusetts this March. It's a great opportunity that he has. He's a great, I think he plays the flute, that's what he does. I think it's a beautiful instrument. My sister tries playing the recorder. I can't imagine practicing that, it's very loud. And then senior Jack Ross is one of the earliest people to arrive to school in the morning. I get here at 7 on the dot, and he's already parked and getting out of his car. So he comes here really early. He's really ambitious. He has started the newspaper club that we had here. He's an active part of the student council and the student committee for the Department of Education, and he has been selected as the Student of the Year for the NABA, Student of the Year of 2016, NABA. So he is, isn't it a Massachusetts vocational area?
MAVA.
Yeah.
MAVA.
This is, if I can just, because for some of the school committee may not know, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
Where every school district that offers 5 or more Chapter 74 programs selects a student of the year, and they're honored at a very elaborate dinner in Worcester at Mechanics Hall. And usually the governor's there or some prominent senator, and this is a really big deal. This is like a big deal.
There's no one more deserving than he, because he's just everywhere. He has his hand in everything that he can get a part of, ambitious, and just the model of a student leader. So congratulations is due. This is, let's see, the Healthy Hearts Life theme of collaborations that CTE majors did. I think this is culinary, health assisting, and let's see, Cosmo. And so these all CTE majors came together and represented the American Heart Association. We ran fundraisers and we made a total of $875. We raised those selling these little ribbons that people wore on National Wear Red Day. A lot of people wore red. It was great. We bought some of these for everybody to have. So if we can pass these around.
Feel free to contribute. You pass them around and take them out.
Yes, let's raise some more. This collaborative project is going all the way from February to April, so we'll be doing some more. Then that's culinary. They wore red for like the whole month, so not just the day. A lot, especially the teachers in the CTE majors participating, were really encouraging to have students participate, and they got a really big turnout because of the support. They're like, come on, let's wear red day. We had announcements, and I was really impressed with the turnout.
Excuse me, what does the red signify?
Heart health. So, we have a memory wall, like, in memory of people who battle heart disease and in memory of loved ones who passed away from it. My grandmother and my uncle battled heart disease, so their names are on the wall as well. Let's see. Yep. This is the sophomore-senior rotation who went for Cradles and Crayons and packaged at least 123 clothing packages ranging for kids from birth to ages 14, yes. They're all really good kids here.
Sure.
Yes, very sure.
This is the early childhood
Yeah.
shop. This is the early education shop.
The handful of the most compassionate people here. So that was the fundraiser that they went to. I think it's a very sweet picture. And then just an add-on here, since we don't have any slide for it, environmental technology seniors earned their confined space and tree certifications on Tuesday, January 7th. Training was provided for free, and it's by the NWRA. So all the seniors got that chance and earned their certification. This is the FFA, and this is the team that went over for the night activity for the Winter Leadership Camp in Oxford. Let's see. They learned to further their leadership and professional skills. And let's see, there's Jeffrey, Will, and Matt over there. They had a fun time. I remember this trip. Everybody came back really happy that they went. It was a great experience. Let's see. This was the Gen Youth. Yes. So biotech and horticulture participated in this a networking event for schools held Northeastern in November.
I'm not sure what that
I had
Here we
such
are.
a
We know what
discussion
this is,
with
though. Go
Yeah,
on.
it's right there. Horticulture is in the process of being on a TV show, This Old House. This is the second time they're going, and they'll be featured in one of the episodes, planting trees, with, let's see, Roger Cook. Is that him?
Yeah.
I had this big, the FFA president was helping me with this. I'm like, I don't know what this is. And it's all jumbled now. It was a very big discussion. But this is really exciting because they get to set up the scene as well as participate in one of the episodes. So they're responsible for planting a bunch of things outside along with the trees. And they set up inside the house. They're charge of helping with at least a little production.
It's on Thursday nights.
Yeah. They're featured under Generation Next, which is all of the CTE vocational programs participating in the renovation of the Newton House.
And then finally, the drama group is underway and they're practicing and performing and setting up for their production in April. Let's see. It's about a writer and his wife who are paying a psychic to come over to help them study for the author's new book. And so they hire a bunch of people to help them with this incantation or whatever they're doing on the table, but the spirit they calls down has a different plan for haunting them.
It's Blythe Spirit, isn't that?
Yeah,
right?
Blythe Spirit.
The old cow.
Yeah, it's a revived classic comedy. It looks very interesting. The show times are April 6th or 7th at 7:30 p.m. in the IRC. I'm looking forward to going. It's a fun event. And that concludes my comment.
When Tracy and y'all came to see me today about the report, they had so many contributions to the report that they had to cut it in half. There were so many things going on and about to go on,
Wow.
so they just limited it to what's already happened.
Yes, Karen.
I would like to say that it's really nice to have the presence of students here again. And more importantly, that the atmosphere of the boards, of the school committees meetings actually allow and welcome that input. So, okay.
Definitely. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Jayla. And if you have an opportunity to go to see Blythe Spirit, I really recommend it. I just know off the play, but I know of the quality of the drama presentations that the school does, and I've gone to most of them on my time in the school committee, and they're just great. So look for the date and drop by. Maybe if the last time you were here, all the chairs are on the flat, that's long gone. They're now tiered, and you can really see what's going on, and it's great upstairs. So I recommend it. Yes.
What is the name of the student of the year again?
Student's name?
Yeah, Jack Cross. Okay.
What town's you?
I can't, I don't know off the top of my head.
We'll send, in the principal's newsletter,
Yeah, I
it
saw
has
that.
a little blurb on it.
Yeah, it's in the principal's newsletter. But again, thank you, Jim.
If any school committee member hasn't gone to them and would like to go this year, let me know. Especially if he's from a member town, I'll let you know. Several of you have gone in the past with us.
Next item is Chair's report, and under it is comments for the good of the organization. That's an item that I've recommended that we add to the agenda, and it would be the comments for the good of the organization. That would be an opportunity for members of the school committee just to quickly share something that they have done, say in the past month or whatever, that would be of interest to the school committee and that essentially relates to what we're doing. We would take perhaps allocate 5 minutes to do that, so they're quick, short little things. And we may put them at the end of the agenda. We'll see if we're going to put them at the end of it or the beginning, because I think there was some concern that we would be lengthening the agenda. But I'll just model something something I might contribute. I may not contribute something every time, and there's no expectation that everyone will contribute or offer something at every meeting. What I would offer is that I wrote a letter to local newspaper, the Minuteman, giving directions to people how to access the progress of the construction at the construction site. In other words, the web page links for that, and I also send it to town meeting members. So that would be something that I would share, which I have shared, and that was in a sense modeling something quick and just for your information. And we'll put it on the agenda next week, so that, our next month, so that if anyone, that'll be the opportunity to lay it out then. So if anyone has anything, just keep it in mind and you can share it with us at the next meeting. For the total amount of time would be about 5 minutes, not 5 minutes presentation, but for everyone to have their say. Does anybody have any questions about what I mean by this, what I meant by this? Okay, we'll see how it goes. It's a test period to see how it goes in the next meeting. Superintendent's report, Dr. McQuillan.
Two brief items, Mr. Chair. The New York City trip was last week. You might recall you approved up to $3,000 for the students to participate in the Harry Connick Jr. show in New York City. We did that, and it's going to air on February 22nd. I think it's a morning show or early afternoon show. We'll send you the information, but the kids did fabulous. And from the kids and their families' point of view, they were very grateful to the school committee for kind of facilitating this to happen. And I'm sure we'll probably have the kids here to talk during the student report in March about their experience. But I'll just give you more information when it's on, when I know it's on.
Your concern was addressed?
Yes.
That your
Exactly.
yeah, sort of mine.
It was addressed. I won't tell you how well it was addressed or it was
That
addressed.
tells you that we either remember or we read minutes.
The second item has to do with legislation. Several of you, I sent out some information today about a couple of items that have to do with Career Tech Ed in general and Minuteman specifically. There has been a $3 billion amendment made to the capital bond bill promoted by the Alliance for Vocational Technical Education. You may have heard me talk about them over the years. $2 billion of that is for the MSBA and funded projects through them. $1 billion, this is over 5 years, is for equipment. The governor also has an equipment bond issue in his budget to continue the equipment grant program for CTE schools, but this is to solidify it, and I don't know if it'll pass or not, but we have a couple of sponsors, thanks to school committee members who reached out. Cindy Friedman was the initial sponsor of that, and then Jamie Eldridge, on the Senate side, Jamie and Ross signed on to it, and I imagine we'll have some more.
Lesser was also.
Lesser from Springfield area, represents Putnam, was, I think, the original sponsor.
Senator Rush signed on.
Yeah. So it looks good. It's going to be heard Thursday and voted on this week, the amendments and perhaps the entire bill. Within that bill, there were two other amendments made. One, number 15, I believe, has to do with Minuteman and providing us $1.3 or $1.4 million to complete our photovoltaic overlay district. I was in Beacon Hill this afternoon. I met with Senator Friedman and Representative Kaufman. We spoke briefly about these bills, and we spoke at length about the enabling legislation.
So are you anticipating a vote by the legislature on those billions of dollars, or by a committee at this point?
Well, the Senate side.
The Senate.
The Senate, and then they'll have to go into conference, depending on what gets voted and what amendments gets passed. There's a whole other process involved. Am I missing something there? I thought there was another item. It was 15 and, no, it was the equipment and the,
The overlay?
When I took a look at the equipment, the amendment I read, which is 1.5 million, not 3.
total was 1.5.
Yeah.
Yeah. that may have gotten trimmed. When we submitted it a few weeks ago, it was at 3, and they said that would be more appropriate for 10 years rather than 5. Plus, it's bigger than the entire capital budget itself. So, but it's, you know, the AVTE, the Alliance for Vocational Technical Education, you'll be hearing more about it. Or at the very beginning of March, we've just completed a white paper and some policy things, and there'll be an event at 10:30, I think it's Friday morning, March 2nd, in the Hall of Flags, where the AVTE will be announcing that white paper on career technical education. And our students are going to be participating in providing refreshments and stuff like that.
Well, just a comment from me, there's been a lot of talk in the state government about the support for career technical education. Now, although this isn't necessarily coming from the state per se, is putting some teeth into it. We hear everyone saying what wonderful job these schools do, but are there resources to do it, to do it better, or whatever you want to call it? So this is, I think, a great step forward to see if the legislature is willing to provide money, but also getting the word out about what we're all about and what we need.
And just, I know we've been talking about it but the enabling legislation is moving forward.
Yeah.
There are a few minor questions that the Senate Council has had, and I've received some of them at 5:30 this afternoon, which we'll be able to answer over the next day or so. The intention is to file it as an amendment in the House budget bill, file it as an amendment to the Senate budget bill, and to file it as a bill itself. And they, Representative Kaufman and Senator Friedman and I were strategizing about that together today. And they feel that it has a better than average chance of passing before June 30th, which was our goal. And I'll just, it sounds like I'm doing a lot of stuff with the legislation. I'll just remind you, you approved a goal of mine to be doing more with the legislation. So, legislators, that concludes my report.
Okay, any questions for Dr. Pullen? All right. School building committee report. George Pauly.
All right. It's blank up here, so. It should be right on that. All right. Many of you have asked, are students involved at all in this process? And the answer is yes. And just examples, last Friday was a great example of student involvement. Some 40 students attended in this room a meeting with people from Gilbane to go through a building information modeling, a BIN system that they use to help take the building from its design stage onto construction. What they do is they've gone from a two-dimensional drawings, which they traditionally do, to a three-dimensional spatial system showing width, height, and depth. The BIM concept envisions virtual construction of a facility prior to it actually being done. They do this in order to reduce uncertainty, improve safety, work out problems, and simulate and analyze potential impacts. The process allows the subcontractors from every trade to input critical information into the model before beginning construction, and opportunities to prefabricate and pre-assemble some of the systems. And a great example of that is the steel that came in from Canada. The plant up there was all prefabricated. So when it comes down, it's all sized right. And so all they have to do, like the erector said, is put it up, and it goes up that quickly. This is some of the pictures that we took of the presentation. These two gentlemen are from Gilbane, and they did the presentation. The gentleman who was presenting there, unbelievable. He was actually terrific, and the students were thoroughly engaged. And, you know, some 40 students there. They were right in. They really were excited. And when you think about it, they were from the construction trades, but they were also from engineering. And you know, I was thinking as I sat there watching them, this is their whole career sitting in front of them that they're being able to witness at Minuteman. So you know, they draw. You know, it's drawn up by the architects, and they put it in this kind of a system, and then it ends up being with a model, and they put together that model. The students got to wear, I call them the 3D glasses. I don't know what else you call them. And of course, some of the comments were, "Well, don't get up, don't throw up." It was basically, but the students had a great time going through the building. They did it both on the big screen and on the little screen. They were going through the gym, but they could go into the building, and this is the kind of thing that they saw. So it was a great time. What's going to happen is from those 40 students, they're going to select out some. They're going to meet over the next weeks and months with the design team, with Gilbane at their house for their weekly meetings to go through the actual process. Unbelievable experience for these kids to have this in a high school setting. Our team has been working over the last 6 months to finalize, 6 weeks over the last, to finalize where we are with our anticipated budget for the project as a whole. Most of the subcontractor bids are almost all in and will be approved either the next meeting or the following meeting of the building committee. I will tell you, we have every reason to believe right now we're going to be on time and on budget. So that's my report.
Any questions for Ford about the report? Sue?
I'm interested to know how you set it up so that the students could be such an integral part of this. That's really, I think, extraordinarily positive.
Nice, I didn't set it up. You'd have to talk to the superintendent.
Okay.
I just had the opportunity to attend, which was, for me, an unbelievable experience.
Well, one of the great things about Gilbane and Skanska is they're always mindful of how can we involve kids. Because if you may recall in the specifications when they were presenting their proposals to be on our team, they had to describe that, how they were going to do that. And so it's, and we even on our weekly budget, our weekly agenda, we have an item of student interaction. Every week. And so we're tracking all the student interaction, and we've been waiting for the BIM thing to get started for a while, but they can only handle 3 or 4 kids at a time because the kids are going to be actually involved when the team is actually making decisions from now on. But everybody needed to get an orientation as to what BIM is, and they came, we gave them lunch, and it was an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So every kid, from every junior and freshman, was it? Or
I thought it was just juniors.
might have been just juniors. Every junior from the 6 shops that would have had to come to this meeting. And then there'll be 3 or 4 every week for the next 8 weeks. Every Friday from 8:30 to 10:30.
A different 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And remember, we had the students doing the wall, you know, and they will be involved in it.
What does BIM stand for?
Building
integrated management
information
or something.
modeling.
Should I give a yes?
You mentioned, I think I heard somewhere that the bids to the subcontractors were going out, maybe the big bids or the final bids.
Big ones are already gone out. Now we're dealing with smaller ones, but we should have them all in within the next 4 weeks or so.
Does that mean that we are really confident about the real price of the building now? Once those go out, they bid on them to come back?
Absolutely.
That's it.
No, we are.
Yeah, no, we really are.
Yeah, I
I'm not
believe
just
you.
saying that.
No, I believe you. Well, it's gonna be built in a year and a half. You gotta finish in a year.
14
You gotta
months.
know.
Well, we have this side of the campus we have to work on until it's really all done, but you're right.
The bids are out. They gave you their word. This is how much it costs if you select them. So that part's just about done.
I mean, stuff happens along the way,
Yeah, well, I
but not much
understand.
stuff is gonna happen.
Okay. You're not gonna dig up Jimmy Hoffa or anybody. It'll be an archaeological site.
We put them back.
I'll just say that, at the building committee meetings, the amount of scrutiny that
The amount
the amount of scrutiny that those bids are subjected to is fine. It is acceptable, beyond acceptable, it's very good.
Any other questions or comments from anyone? Thank you for.
Ed might have something to say about permit.
I do. And I have a letter from the town manager that we can pass around in open session. Yeah. So this, we've been going back and forth. This is the latest thing. The amount due went from 1.1 million to 800 and something thousand. We still have a few weeks to go back and forth. I'll just let you get it. And if you go to the back page, what you don't get is the benefit of what I sent them on January 31st, and some of the other correspondence are not all in one handout here, but I think this is appropriate to get into the public record actually at this point in time, because after whatever, it's down to 922,000 total, and that includes everything we paid to date. So it's still an exorbitant amount. I haven't spoken to our council in regards to this last amount, but as I've said before at school building committee meetings, and perhaps in public session at these meetings, my intention is to not put the project at risk, in that we would pay the amount due under duress, and we would not be acquiescing any of our rights to pursue relief of what we believe, what I assume we believe as a school committee to be an excessive permit fee. When we get to the point of, or when I get to the point of understanding what our alternatives are, I think that's an appropriate time to have an executive session and discuss what those are. We may have counsel here, so we can answer your questions in executive session, so we understand the risks, the costs, and the potential benefits, and then make an informed decision about moving forward.
Jeff?
I have two questions. The first question is, do we have any idea what the real cost to the town of Lincoln of the permanent process would be? So you say it's excessive. Looking at the number and having some idea what they're going to do, it seems excessive to me. But there's any way to say, well, if you were going to give it to us at cost, this is how much it would be.
We have a reasonable estimate. It would be somewhere. Well, you'd have to kind of parse it out a little bit. What the costs to Lincoln are to continue to inspect the site in accord with the construction process is fairly minimal in terms of what other similar projects have required. What we can't really say with certainty is what Lincoln believes their expenses are. You know what I'm saying? Because we've run into disagreements, or that's too strong a word, but differences of opinion about when an inspection should happen. And based upon, historical and past practice of other projects of this type, which is a controlled construction project that has a high level of scrutiny, local town inspections have been minimal at best.
Could you, let's say an independent, highly professional person was running this process. What would be the ballpark actual cost of it be from that person's point of view? In your opinion, not that it would be off by 100%, just trying to get a ballpark. Because I know nothing about construction.
Well, we did a survey. I told you about that, right?
Yes. Okay.
And we had 18, I told you about that.
I don't recall the number there.
18 superintendents responded to a survey I put out a month ago now.
Yep.
And there were 18 projects within the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Of those 18, 90% had a reduction in the permitting fee. 50% of the 18 had their permitting fees reduced to 0.
That could be though, because it's going from one hand to the next.
Well, it was reflective of the services. We probably shouldn't talk about this too much more, because the answers to your questions are part of our strategy that we would have to.
The other part, my other question is, I understand that we still have a permit that we need to get from the town of Lincoln. Is that
Yes,
correct?
our
And
building permit.
the final building permit. And what is the time frame by which we need that before?
A couple
getting that?
weeks.
So we need that within a few weeks.
Yes.
And you believe there are any obstacles to getting that permit within a few weeks?
Not if we pay them the 900.
So it's just the money issue. You pay the money, and then we're all happy. We're going to no other issues to do it.
Happiness is a relative term. When it
Well,
comes to
some.
moving the project along, there'll be happiness all around. And then we'll seek relief in other ways available to us.
So the plan would be then to go ahead, get the permit, and then seek
Right,
relief.
we can't
thereafter.
do anything
Great.
else.
Thank you.
Do you foresee a special meeting of the school committee to discuss a strategy you might want to apply?
Not before our next meeting,
Okay.
unless something I don't anticipate comes
Okay.
up.
So the full fee might be paid before the next meeting when then we discuss the follow-up strategy.
Yes.
Okay, cannot before, okay. Yes.
And is it clear or not whether this is subject to reimbursement by the MSBA?
Oh, it's always been clear, none of this is reimbursable, including legal fees, permit fees, none of it's reimbursable.
This is not terribly relevant, but I was just at a meeting before I came to this meeting, and there's a private school building being built in the town of Dover, and I was with the fire inspector, and I said, well, tell me about the fees of this project. He said, it's a controlled project, there are no fees. This is for a private school.
That answers a lot of my question right there.
Any others?
Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope, wish you luck with all of this.
Wish all of them.
I did. I just said that.
You don't need luck, you
I haven't gotten bitter yet. In public.
All right, moving on to the principal report. John Dillon, please do a 3-4 begins on page 6 of the agenda packet.
Good evening. We're seeking permission for an overnight field trip for the FFA students to travel to Sturbridge, Mass, leaving Minuteman on March 14th and returning to Minuteman on March 16th. Be a total of 20 students, 15 students from horticulture and 5 students from biotech, along with 2 adults.
Do I hear a motion to that effect?
So,
Al? Second. Alice and Ford. Although, yes, Jeff.
Oh.
Yeah, that's you.
Yeah, okay, so that's an interesting breakdown. The biotech students are there because primarily
They're part of FFA.
they're part of FFA, and the reason that they're part of FFA biotech is because they're involved in which aspect of this are they most interested in?
The competitions, you mean?
Yeah, what kind of
Yeah,
competitions they have?
well,
with biotech
environmental,
students?
a few years ago, I'm sorry, Jack.
No, go ahead.
This is your
Go ahead, you have
principal. I used to teach agriculture. A few years back, we wanted to expand the enrollment of FFA. We needed to open it up to biotech, environmental tech, landscaping, and horticulture, because there are competitions that are really right up their alley. Sustainability contests in biotech. If you go to other parts of the United States of America, like California, biotech is part of the agricultural high school. You know, gene splicing, plant reproduction, what do you call that?
Genetically modified.
No, all sort of, yeah.
Grafting?
Grafting stuff, yeah. Plant propagation, that's what I was thinking of. Different media and plant propagations. So they have projects that they, and it's all legal, you know, everything's fine.
They work here with those projects here as part of their curriculum,
Yes.
along with the horticulture or some other group?
It's in the biotech and the environmental tech curriculum. This is sort of where the three come together. That's why they're in a pathway together.
Yes, Karen.
I can tell you, working now at Drummond Farm for a few years, that the two fields are very closely related and growing, no pun intended, closer together practically every month. Just a whole lot of work going on. That you wouldn't have thought of as agriculture when we were kids.
I read a lot of science fiction and would think so.
Jack, in the cover memo from Sarah Ard, the first paragraph says that possibly additional funds from the school will be used, and the second paragraph says that no funds will be needed. I just wanted to, I don't care which.
I saw that too, which way it together, but I think they're obviously hoping that the students do some fundraising to set aside for that money, but.
Yeah, she told me what they were doing, and I just wanted this thing in here to add some more money if they needed coverage, you know. You may see that as a standard thing on these requests going forward, just so that you're aware. They're raising funds, but I don't want any kid left behind because they didn't raise enough.
Any other questions? All right, all in favor of the motion? All opposed? Unanimous. Thank you, Jack. Anything else you wanted to add to your?
No, thank you.
All right. Assistant Superintendent Support Kevin Mahoney, approval of the FY19 budget and preliminary assessments will have two votes, taking two votes. One is to approve the budget of 21 million, et cetera, and the other is to approve the preliminary assessments. To approve the budget, it requires it requires a 2/3 of the weighted vote of the entire committee, not merely 2/3 of the weighted vote of those present. And we are all here, so that should be all right if that's required. So if you get a discussion.
Are you ready for the motion first?
Yes, go ahead.
So moved.
Sorry. I think Ford got that one. Discussion, yes.
So during Kevin's very good presentation, I enjoyed the budget book. It's fun kind of not being at the FinCom meetings, but reading the budget book and seeing that there's enough information in there, the way that it's written now, to get a really good idea of what's happening, which wasn't necessarily the case 5 or 10 years ago. One of the things you said during your presentation, I knew, but I found very interesting. You said this is the last budget for the old building. So that brought two quick questions. That made me think, wow, I knew that, but now I know. Two questions came to me. The first one being, I would imagine that the majority of the moving expense will be in the next budget and not in this budget. Is that correct? Or is that including the following budget? And if so, do we know what the magnitude of that number is?
I'll answer the last question first. We don't know the exact magnitude of the number yet. We provided some funding in this budget because we're going to start to move some of our equipment after April vacation. So we're anticipating that we'll have some costs then. And then that summer, which will be fiscal '20, we'll know what our actual moving costs will be, and we'll incorporate it in fiscal '20.
Would you hazard a guess as to the approximate magnitude? Within, 100%.
I don't have that, but I'd be happy to look into it a little further and follow up. I just don't have it. There's going to be some rigging required because of the machinery and the equipment. I wouldn't hazard a guess.
A lot of it is in the project budget.
It's in the project.
It's, the moving expense, a lot of it is in the project. Okay. So the other related question is we've got to start thinking now, and I guess this is moving from speculation to reality. A new building with new facilities are going to have possibly very different operating costs in the year. These are either efficiencies or new programs or whatever. So a lot of the items in the budget that you can say, well, it's going to be approximately last year, except for we got to look at the cost of electricity a little bit. You can't do that again for the following year. So, and I know that we were building the project. We had some expectations about perhaps some lower operating costs and efficiencies, smaller building, more systems. Of course, we came out with, future possible budgets as part of the process in getting the building created. Do we have any more realistic ideas about whether there will be a notable savings in operating costs in the new building? Or will there be additional expenses in operating costs once we get beyond the first year, where there may be all sorts of special things happening? Do you have any real idea of that now that we know exactly what systems are going in, exactly what the square footage is, all that kind of stuff?
We had some estimates early on as part of our reporting process to MSBA. We had to give some estimates of what we thought our energy costs were. And we're working as part of the lead aspect of the building to understand some of those energy-related costs. So when we did our budget modeling, we did include some reduction in our energy costs. On the other side, I have been cautioned that not to be overly optimistic or aggressive about that, because sometimes these systems, have a cost associated with maintaining those at a level that there may be some costs that we don't anticipate.
And there will also be, of course, different ongoing maintenance costs. When you have a lot of new stuff, you have to theoretically maintain that, and the cost of cleaning and maintaining may also be different, and security may
I'll
be
tell you the
different.
area that we're going to be short in. I'll tell you right now.
Okay.
Personnel. The level of training that we require, that's going to be required in this new building, is not the level of expertise we currently have. We've met with our staff about it, and we're putting together some professional development activities that over the next year and a half or so, we're going to have as many people who are willing and able within our own staff to rise to that level. But we're looking at restructuring and reorganizing how we deliver some of those maintenance services, so that who we have on staff are really a few custodians, but not very many. Most of them are going to be licensed mechanics, engineers, that kind of thing. So that staffing expenditure line item or enterprise is going to have to go up. And I don't think we planned it well enough in our projections.
And we have purchased some training through the project with Galvani. We've purchased, they're going to help train us. And they give us all the background material.
You may need people with different backgrounds that are more expensive. We will. So that'll be an increase in expense. Now, related to that, will we be in a position to maintain the building at a higher level than this building was maintained for a lot of its history as part of the ongoing, such that we don't end up with some of the problems we have now? Can that be part of the operating budget as well? I'm referring really before your time, Mr. Beaucroft. So
Believe me, my friend, I inherited all that stuff.
I'm well aware.
So yes, it's going to. This is a great question, and one that the policies that we put in place around facilities and management and maintenance need to be looked at again. I think there are some we don't have that we could have. To institutionalize capital maintenance expenditures that the finance committee can look at and review, and we can get those in place, so that the next superintendent, the next school committee, ad infinitum, has got to follow policy that will make sure that never happens again.
And let's make sure that we do it right, even if our budget is higher, because in the long run, it saves a lot.
Well, we have so many things now that weren't in place when this building was first opened, in terms of regulations and commitments we've already made, like the order of conditions in Lexington, the order of conditions in Lincoln. We're required at semi-annual reporting. We had to go present an operating and maintenance plan and training plan to the Lexington Conservation Commission in order for them to give us a permit. So that level of oversight and regulatory obligations are unlike anything they could have imagined back in 1974. So we have some work to do in policies to catch up with all those obligations, and we have plenty of time to do it.
If I could add to that also, the vendor that we currently use for our supplies and chemicals is a value add. Also do analysis on the level of effort that's required to clean facilities and to what degree you'd like those cleaned. And they have different evaluation criteria. They did a report for us about 8 or 9 years ago. So we've asked them to take a look at the new building. We provided them the floor plans for the new building, just to look at it and to give us some type of an idea, or based on that evaluation, what type of staffing we're talking about, what are some of the training requirements in order to maintain that building. So between, I think, getting this from a professional in the cleaning facilities management business, along with some of the guidance we will be getting from Gilbane, I think we'll be able to have a pretty cohesive approach to how we want to handle this upon moving.
Carrie and then Jay.
What I was saying, I guess we're kind of crossing the line back into the building project here, but I wanted to reference the legislation, which talks about, yes, recognizing the ongoing maintenance and not letting it go and all of that. But one of the stumbling blocks has been getting the agreement of member communities to invest money into a building, not the new building, but over the last 35 years, maintenance and major maintenance that should have been done on this facility and was skipped for whatever reasons of the inability of the member communities to reach consensus on that. And the legislation which specifies that any of the proceeds of leasing this property would be invested back into the debt service and ongoing maintenance of the facility. I think that's the best reason to support it. Not,
and one of the things we've done in the last 5 or 6 years is that we had a healthy capital component to the annual budget. Prior, I couldn't find many budgets that had any capital expenditures, the few years prior to I even started. It doesn't have to be a big, difficult thing. You just build it in on an annual basis, and you don't have to go through this, what we've been through. And there's good rules of thumb or best practice when it comes to, maintaining buildings. There's science around that now that wasn't here 45 years ago. Those are things we've been very mindful of for a long time, and we have to have it in place, over the next 12 months. But I think we can do it without having to have unanimousness, town meeting that, anxiety here and anxiety there.
So 2 points. One, when you talk about the personnel and training and possibly, I mean changes there. Is that something that you can do as superintendent, or do you have to bring that back to the collective bargaining process?
No, we can do it.
Okay. And then
we don't have an organization
other
than the
a
teachers.
union for Okay. And then the second, I was just sort of thinking about that amendment, that second amendment about the photovoltaic. Is that already in the building plan, and this is just a question of whether the state will fund it? Or
It's shovel ready.
But I mean, if the legislature does not approve the funding for it, will
The
it not get
infrastructure
done?
is still there.
Okay. Jennifer?
That's a totally different question. I noticed that the debt service payments don't include any capital fee until the building is occupied. So which fiscal year will that be? Is it 2021?
It'll be fiscal year 20, so.
So 2020. So this is the one budget cycle that's not included. The next budget cycle, that will be included in the capital.
That's correct. We'll be setting the budget, we'll be setting the capital fee around this time next year, notifying the communities that they'll be paying it the following year.
But it will be collected in 1 year and expended in the next.
Yeah.
So FY '21 is when we
Is
see
when
a
it'll be the
substantial
first time it'll be
revenue.
used.
Which is also when the debt,
Oh,
the annual debt service.
Big change, but to make the optimistic.
Well, we're doing 36 million now,
I know what
46
it is.
million,
I
and then
look
you
at
do the
better, I
rest.
like it better when it looks like it.
Will the budget book go out electronically to the communities? And if so, can the school committee get a copy of them? I know in my community they'll want it.
We've been directing I sent out an email to the town managers, town administrators, pointing them to where it is on the website. And we'll be sending the assessment letters out, but certainly if you'd like a hard copy, we have to provide it.
If it's on the website, that's what you can direct people to, that's perfect.
Just wondering how quickly we can get this, so some of us, oh, your presentation, I'm sorry. I can't see it. I need to start working on my presentation to our finance committee hearing post haste.
Sure, I'd be happy to email it to you.
Thank you. Because that gives me about 85% of the way there. Also on the website.
Is it on there now?
It's on there now. It is on the website, but I'm assuming you want something you can work with.
Yes, yes, I need it in.
The presentation of the budget and the budget book.
Are on the website.
Sue?
Not to nickel and dime here, because I can imagine, I know how much effort y'all put into getting this thing together and balanced and fair and all that. But I'm wondering, with everything else that's going on, if this is the year to increase the stabilization fund to that amount.
So I mean, that was an active conversation there, and I started off with that same question, and I came around to thinking that this was the right number. I think it's actually good. I'm gonna turn around and think it's good to actually put that out there and make it as visible as possible. We could have gotten to the same place, I think, just by moving things around. I mean, if it really were important to both prepare for the future building needs and sort of fly under the radar, I am convinced that we could have come up with a creative way to do it. But this is really a much more straightforward way of doing it, and I think we'll be well served. So we went back and forth.
And there's a corresponding reduction in capital equipment costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I still think that one of the things that I'm trying to be mindful of is, although I think we're optimistic that much of our FF&E needs will see a good portion of it funded within the project budget, I'm still concerned about some of those things that may be on the fringes that need to be funded. You know, there may be some additional equipment needs that didn't get included, or that there may be some additional costs related to the transition that we may need to have access to funds. So I think it's just, we've been mindful of this for the last couple of years, and we did get some comfort level to back off the original recommendation because of some of the points that Mr. Galen brought up. But I do think it's probably the responsible thing to move forward continue to talk to our local officials on the strategy that we're utilizing, just to make sure that we have funds available.
It seems to me that there's a lot of the anticipated increases in health insurance and the pension fund and all that sort of stuff that's covered here already. And I'm not sure I have an answer if somebody says, well, why do we have to, increase the stabilization fund by a factor of 200,000 in a year when the rest of the assessment is going up so much already? I don't think I have an answer for that. And
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but originally we wanted 400,000 in stabilization, right?
That's correct.
Then we reduced that to 300,000. But then we reduced our capital equipment by 300,000.
That's correct.
So we're really, it's not an increase in stabilization, well, it is. But that amount, that stabilization fund can be used for the same thing as capital equipment. So we're putting it into a different account and not using it in the last year in this building because we want to use it later. And that's really the only mechanism by which we can sort of save for the future in that line item, which we know is going to be underfunded by the MSBA.
Yeah. I mean, so let me take one more crack at it. It's that, yeah, there were a series of cuts that were made in a lot of places as we sort of, pushed and said, okay, what were you actually spending? Can we take some money out of these other lines? And so in a $20 million budget, you're always going to have certain lines that have some kind of cushion. And where what was nice about the process was that we squeezed about $600,000 out net between the first budget proposal and what was given, and that all goes down to squeezing, to making the assessment increase as manageable as it could be. Now, we could have said, okay, let's just put in $100,000 and leave some of those other lines, where they started off, having greater cushion, knowing that if we need it, that we can start to scurry and look in various lines for it. But this is actually, I think the answer is to say, this is a more transparent way of dealing with it, and that's what you're getting from. That's what you were getting from this budget is just a very clear realization that cushion is going to be needed.
So I go back to Arlington, and looking at the budget book, I know some of the issues that will be brought up. Our enrollment went down. The teacher-student ratio is Minuteman is higher than any other. We know all those things, and we know there's good reasons for a lot of that, and we expect change. All that I agree with. I think this is not the year to throw a $200,000 additional cushion in. I really don't, especially when one of the questions I'll get is, well, that sets a precedent. So now we're going to put $300,000 in every year. So if you look over 5 years, it's actually quite a lot of money. And I'm not saying we won't need it. I'm saying this isn't the year. That's my opinion.
I spent something like 8 years on the vocational technical advisory to the Board of Education. And I got to listen to other school districts talking about how they hadn't enough money for FF&E on these other buildings. And particularly vocational schools, Essex Aggie was the most common reference point because there weren't very many that had been able to do a building project, right? But they really didn't have anything left for the technical stuff because the only money available from the MSBA was the same amount of money they would get for a normal high school. So they had the chairs, the desks, and all of that sort of thing, but they didn't have any money for the technical equipment. And so when I'm thinking about Minuteman, I'm thinking, God, the one thing that Minuteman has to do is prepare for this underfunded piece of MSBA funding. You just have to be smart about it. And I've been watching them be smart about it. And then I noticed in this budget presentation that the Perkins is reduced by 81,000. Perkins is used by vocational schools for equipment, right? So you really have to assume that you're not going to have enough money for FF&E. And I think that's what they're doing, and I think it's responsible. So I would support it. It's really sad when they build a vocational school and they don't have any equipment. That is really bad.
I don't think you have to worry about this being a long-term precedent. I don't think that should be a concern. The way I look at it is that I think that we're going to have a number of years of very interesting budgets and budget discussions. As we evolve from one system to another, and we go through construction, and all the political changes, and access issues, and enrollment issues, it just seems to me it's pretty natural that we're going to have a few unusual years, and each year is going to be harder to explain than normal. These are going to be more changes than from the previous year. So I'm kind of wrapping that idea in, that they're going to be harder things to explain for a few years until we're into the new building and we understand how all the new systems work and what our real expenses are. But I'm certainly not worried about this. $300,000 is a lot of money to put into the stabilization fund in a year, but I think we have extraordinary reasons to do so. And as Jim mentioned, what we're doing is really not really increasing the budget by $300,000 to do that. What we're doing is rearranging things so that people will know what that money in our budget is most likely going to be used for. So it's not really an increase of $300,000. It doesn't set a precedent. It's more the sort of unusual and extraordinary things that we're going to have to do for all the changes that are happening, which is the changes in the building and changes in how we deliver education with the new education system we have up, and with changes in how students come here and enrollment, all that sort of stuff. It's going to be a few very difficult years for us in constructing a budget. Doesn't bother me. If it was a precedent, it would bother me. If I thought it was a precedent, but I don't think so. Not in the least bit worried about that, personally.
Sue, have you heard, did your hand up? Let me ask, if I may ask.
Sure.
I was wondering if you had heard a rationale from, or an amalgamation of the rationales that you'd be able to bring to Arlington, or if you have or have not, perhaps you could talk more to Kevin to get another or other different or additional rationales for why it was done, or why it was placed in the budget this way, and where the money came from, and that sort of thing.
Thank you for the insights, but again, representing my town, of course it would set a precedent, because when we look at the budget next year, it's going to have a year-over-year change in each category, just like it does now. And if it's $300,000 next year, it will be a zero change. So that's just a fact. I also wonder, if we know that this is going for furnishing, why don't we just have a line item for furnishing?
Part of the strategy is to make sure that we're able to apply these funds in subsequent years. We're not going to know immediately by the end of FY19 what our needs are. We'll probably know better in 20, and even I've been advised that some of the MSBA sessions in fiscal 2 years out, we'll probably still be identifying areas that we'll need to invest in order to fully equip the building. So we thought that this would be an appropriate strategy, that we could put money aside so that we could meet those needs without having to go without it. I think that's been what we've been trying to accomplish by funding this account.
Karen?
Everything Jim said, we talked about this for a long time in the finance committee meeting. But for me, boils down to, very simply, if we don't put the money aside, this year the jump in the responsible budget level will be higher next year. You know, so we could go like this, or we can go like this. And I'd rather go like that.
And then on top of that, remember that the school committee has approved a 3-year contract with a 3rd-year contract, which will be the fiscal 20 budget has a 3% COLA. This just has a 2% COLA. So we know that next year, the finance committee is going to have to find $170,000 or so to pay for that extra percent of COLA. And look, my time on this subcommittee is unlimited, so there's not much of a precedent that I can set. But I would agree with you that just as a member, I do think this is setting a precedent towards having a more realistic level of what a stabilization fund should be funded at every year, because it does segregate it. It can be carried over from year to year, and we aren't just counting on surpluses falling down to E and the D and sort of a match for showing up the next year. I think it's a better way to run the budget.
Is there any new information or new questions that people have about the budget at this point? As I mentioned, this requires a 2/3 of the weighted vote of the entire committee. The entire committee is here. So all in favor of the FY19 budget assessment as presented?
I'm sorry, can I make one more comment? I am going to vote in favor of the budget because I have no interest in slowing things down. Part of the reason I'm voting in favor of it is my working time with Kevin enables me to believe. I still don't see it, but I believe that this is real. It may be one could publicize it differently, but if you think it's important, I will vote for it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll vote again. All in favor? It's unanimous. All opposed? It's unanimous. And I would say, as I was said earlier, just a couple of minutes ago, continue talking to Kevin about the rationale for it, and also integrating what other people have said. If we can help you with your, and I know you're the one that has to face the music, if you would. But if there's any help that we can, the finance committee can provide for you or other members, don't hesitate to call on us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Can I just ask one question that I just thought of?
Yes.
Is there any OPEB funding in this?
There is, we level funded at 50,000.
50,000.
Thank you.
Yeah, it wasn't labeled that, that was the OPEB.
Okay.
We did decide it was not the year to increase the OPEB to a more responsible level.
It will never be.
Right, exactly.
All right, do I hear a motion to approve the preliminary assessments as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Jeff got that one. And Carrie seconded. Alice, I hope you got the second. Discussion. And this also requires a 2/3 vote. Alice?
I believe that you can never increase assessments, that you can only decrease assessments. So once we set these assessments, the rest of the committee just needs to know this historical archaic piece of information.
It's the same as town meeting, you can reduce budget, you can't add to it. I thought you could. Okay, and notice any question none? Hearing none? All in favor of approving the fiscal 19, FY19 preliminary assessments of $14,139,855. 10 people, all opposed, none, it's unanimous. And the second motion is approval of the 2018-19 postgraduate tuition. Do I hear a vote to establish the postgraduate tuition rate as $7,600 per program effective July 1st, 2018?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Alice and Jennifer. Discussion. Yes, Jeff.
And the reason for this increase again?
We have not increased the rates in 3 fiscal years. We took a brief survey that we included in the packet. We have found for the most part that we were lagging in some of the out-of-district and some of our in-district rates. So we felt it was appropriate. The equivalent adjustment is about an average annual increase of about 3%.
And do you believe that this will have an impact on enrollment in this program, or do you think it will just won't make a difference?
We're not anticipating that it will have an impact.
Karen?
My questions are about the comparisons that we had to other schools that were in the packet. One of them showing Neshoba Valley Technical, now there's only a handful of 4 programs there, but they're free to residents of member towns, is that regardless of age?
Apparently.
And so that means that all of the member communities are paying for that in their assessment at the full rate?
That's correct.
Is what it
Yeah,
looks like?
we did look into that late this afternoon, and because those students counting their assessment, they're paying for the assessment.
And I was surprised to see that some of them split out by program. Was one price for one program or one for another, but the difference, looking at Assabet Valley, the difference in cost between in-district and out-of-district is really quite
Part of the
wide.
reason is their programs, postgraduate programs are Chapter 74 approved. So they are charging the Chapter 74 tuition rate. It's established by the department for their postgraduates.
Any other questions or comments? This just requires a simple majority. All in favor to establish the post-graduation tuition rate? All opposed? 10 in favor, 10 unanimous.
What is our postgraduate enrollment?
We have about 32 students currently.
Kevin, the FY18 budget report, second quarter.
Yes, you'll find that on it's the 13th page in your budget packet for the district expenditure report. It's noted as S1, 4 pages, 2 that are letter size, it's summarized, and then there's additional pages that are legal size. It gives you more detail. I'd like to focus some of my general comments on the on pages S1 and S2. I think that to look at page S2, we'll start from the bottom and work our way back. On line 93, you'll see a line called administrative holds. Is everybody with me? We knew early on, after we sold the general obligation bond, $36 million, that that was higher than what our initial bond sale was, we anticipated for our initial bond sale. So when you look at line 83 in column G, you'll note there was a deficit of about $139,000. So we needed to identify funds to offset that projected deficit early on in the fiscal year. So we went through, I worked with the budget managers and identified about $165,000 of administrative holds. Those are holds that we've encumbered, the business office has encumbered, that will not be expended because we're going to be using those to apply to that projected deficit. So I just wanted to point that out early on so that when you get right down to the bottom line on line 95, you'll see that we're projecting a balance of about $253,000 as of December 31st, which is about 1.3% of the budget. It factors in all of our salaries and all of our anticipated costs. I do note on a number of line items on S1 and S2, some of the comments that may have driven what's either being projected as a high surplus or a deficit. And I also note the administrative holds. Some of the things that are impacted here were discussed in the FY19 budget presentation, as it talks about the DAV specialist position, the additional teaching position that we included. We've factored in, we projected on page S2, line 52, column G, we're looking at a projected deficit of about $56,000 related to primarily the energy costs. And I think that those are the primary items that we've highlighted here. But I think it's still early on. The next quarter will be very telling because we'll be through March. We'll have a fairly good handle on how we end up with our utilities and also our snow removal costs. So right now, I guess I would call it cautious optimism as far as this report goes.
Just a quick comment on item 62. Net change in subscribers.
Yes.
So you had more people who are participated in that program than anticipated?
Yeah, I think part of it is we had a couple of additional new hires that we had that added to the cost. When you factor the impact of a family plan, it's about $20,000. So when you pick up a couple of new subscribers that you didn't previously anticipate, that has a budget impact. I would point to line 63, however, where you see this projected surplus of $130,000. You see that impact when you see a shift to some of our retirees when they go on to the retiree, from active to the retiree plan, you realize the savings there. So although we bring on additional folks to take the place of the retiree, you may see a slight increase or a break even with that, but you'll see a savings on the retiree piece because the percentage contribution is lower for the district than it is for the actors. So I look at those two line items as the net. It's about $25,000.
We also look at happiness stuff, where staff get married and they're having children, and they're still working here, but they need to change their health insurance.
We have had that occasion.
We've got, I think, 4 babies going to
Yeah.
be dropped here pretty soon.
Yeah, which is
Next couple
impacting
months.
the substitute account.
That's the substitute account. That's killing us.
Any other questions or comments for Jim?
Kevin, were you thinking about talking about the revolving funds as well too?
That will be next, yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
It's revolving accounts. It's in your packet, 17th page in your packet. Title R1 and R2. As I look at the revolving funds, I think what raises attention in my mind that I've been working with the community ed directors, what we're trying to project in terms of our revenue for the upcoming summer school youth programs. I think we saw a dip in our revenue last year, primarily driven by lower enrollment. And I think some of that lower enrollment may have been a result of, we transitioned that administrative position last year. We did have a director and an administrative assistant, and as we were transitioning that, there was a gap in the administrative support in that position. And I think as we rolled forward on that, we slipped a little bit on the distribution of the catalog, which I think had a negative impact on our enrollment. We've addressed that. We expect the catalog to go out. Actually, I think it's going up next week. So I'm hoping once we get that out early enough and start the marketing program early on, we should see an increase in our enrollment, which will bring back the revenue. Because that's been a consistent program over the years, so I think it's important that we get that out. As far as some of the other programs, however, that was in the Fund 11. That was the first group there. On page R1. As far as the other programs, though, I think that we're seeing positive trends in our PG program. We're projecting about $198,000. We started out the year at $149,000, so that's working in a positive direction. Our facilities rental, when we look at this was one of the things that I think prompted the school committee to look at the recommendation on the utility allocation to see if that revolving fund could support more of those costs, because I think between, the rentals up at the Tremont School and the Energy House, we're seeing some significant revenue, plus the community pool, as we discussed, has been a major draw as well. Some of the expenditures we've made in the past out of the facilities account we're not seeing this year. When the Tremont School moved in, we had to make some significant renovations to accommodate their population. We made some significant investments in 16 Mill with the expectation of putting that online as a rental property. Of course, that plan all changed once the building project got approved, and we realized some of the savings associated with having the project team located there rather than in mobile trailers. So I think that's what's trending with some of the fund balance there, and I think that fund balance will be helpful as we continue the development of the facility. Looking at our on R2, I'm not seeing any red flags of significance with our vocational accounts, the shop accounts that are managed based on services provided. And of course, the middle school food services is about break even. Our tuition revolving account is basically aligns with the current enrollment, the current billing, and is tracking fairly closely to our revenue projection for next year. Jeff?
Under food service, we have good news here. A few years ago, we had bad news. So what happened?
We have a great director who's very creative, works with culinary arts, works with administration, accommodates changes very rapidly, and she's just been doing a fabulous job.
You're saying that the primary change was a change in management that made a difference?
Well, in my mind, that's when the positive changes began. And she works closely with Kevin, and so they've been able to kind of track, put in some new systems that are more efficient. The credit card thing, so it's been a work in progress, but I attribute it to her and to Kevin.
Well, I don't want to let this go by without a compliment, because I remember a few years ago, we had some very unhappy discussions about this for a number of years, and a few things were changed, and now it's a happy discussion. I just don't want that to pass, because it's a big headache we had, now it's solved. Apparently.
Thank you. Yes.
Terry?
Just on the trades, there are several with $0 activity.
Can you tell us the item number, the department number, that helps people with
It's 1,200?
There's
1,200.
No, 1,400. There's several with $0 expected through the year. How many, are some of those totally inactive? And if small balances subject to being closed out at some point, or is it just that they haven't spent any money so far this year?
Yeah, I think it's more low volume type of activity. The projects will come up from time to time. There has been some discussion by some of those instructors to be a little bit more active with some projects, and so I think it's responsible to keep those open, and then once we transition into the new building, we just have to focus on some of those services.
Okay, thank you.
So on the flip side, this is the first time I've noticed it, that the two highest revenue ones are the Cosmo and the Auto, and is that because they're doing fees, that they're doing service for fees?
That's correct.
And then on the summer school program, I'm just draw the committee members' attention to the budget book, page 11, and that's really where the red flag is, that for this past year, the summer school attendance was only 475, whereas the previous year it was 772, and going back in 2 years, it was 1,062. So we really do hope that that's just a blip that happened last year, and it's easily corrected by sending out the catalog. It's just a good place to sort of see where that red flag should be waved.
Any other questions or comments?
I'll just comment for the minutes that the summer school is going to take a hit in the year that we move. Our postgraduate programs are going to have to all be restructured in the new building. They're going to have to run in the afternoon and evening. So we really don't know what that's going to be like. We have a parallel effort to have our postgraduate programs all approved as Chapter 74 programs, and at the same time approved under Title V, so students can access financing. And our first advanced manufacturing program will be a post-secondary program, so we'll be able to charge that higher tuition next year.
You will still be working on
Oh, yeah.
students?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's fine and normal to have those programs get scaled down, and we just got to make sure that the spending on those programs gets scaled down appropriately.
Or eliminated or suspended.
So that was one of the big, one of the reasons Jeff is interested in making sure that the revenue for the programs match the expenditures or whatever, and that we weren't carrying deficits in a lot of programs. Jeff, that was, he emphasized that for many years and continues to, which is because our conscience is clear and our revenue and budget in good shape. Anyone else have a comment or question?
And you should have mentioned that this schedule was reviewed in detail with the finance subcommittee at their last meeting. So I always like to meet with the finance subcommittee before making the presentation of the committee.
Right, we should mention that. Alice?
Can you give us more detail on Title V with respect to students getting financing?
Yeah, under the federal regulations, in order to access federal funding, whether they be student loans or other grants such as Pell Grants, a program that the student's applying to and enrolled in has to be approved by an outside agency. Up until, 7, 8 years ago, the Mass Department of Ed was the credentialing agency. Now that agency is called CAI or something, anyway, it's an out-of-state agency. But what has really happened, and I commend the Department of Ed, underline that in the minutes, for integrating the Chapter 74 process and the Title V approval process, all in the same breath. And it's being expedited for 10 schools, including Minuteman, around advanced manufacturing.
Okay, and did that answer your question? Anything else? All right.
That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Very good, thank you. Moving on to subcommittee reports, update on strategic planning. Sue Sheffield.
We have had one meeting, I think a very productive one. We're meeting again on Thursday of this week. I'm not sure if we're meeting at 10 or 10:30. 10:30, okay. Here.
In my conference room, I will be, yeah.
Good, excellent. For this next meeting, what we're going to focus on is one of our top priorities, which is trying to ensure, to the best of our ability, that people who sit at this table are the best people we can possibly get for this role. And we are looking at 3 items. One is the process of candidating, if you will, so that the people who are interested in serving as school committee members have a clear sense, as much as we're able, of what is required in the job. And that will involve, we will be describing that process. We have a lot of information from what's happened in the past, both good, bad, and indifferent. Liz and Amy have collected a lot of information of, I think, some of the job descriptions and whatnot, processes from 2009, mission statements and all that. So the subcommittee is reviewing that right now. Okay, so item 1 will be the candidating process. Then we want to look at the onboarding process. Once someone has decided to join the committee, has been appointed, how do we ensure that they come up to speed as quickly as possible? And last but not least, what we've been calling a job description, but I think it's more like the role of that appointee on Minuteman relative to their town. We want to draft something, bring it back to the full committee, make sure that we have as much information and illumination as we possibly can around those items. And the product from this first objective will be written understanding of how those processes work.
Harry?
It strikes me that it might be interesting to have input, or at least the opportunity for appointing authorities to comment on the aspects of the role with respect to representing their home community. I think, we want it to be, I don't want to assume too much. I feel
yes,
that my responsibility is to keep my home community's position in mind, but to serve here primarily for the benefit of the district, or else I shouldn't be here. But it is the appointing authority that ultimately decides who's on the school committee. And if there is a way, not perhaps directly, but indirectly, to discover, hopefully in advance, if there are differences of opinion in that respect.
we're hoping to provide guidance to the appointing authority. I think in most cases, they really don't know what they're doing. They don't, understand what the role is here. Perhaps that's overstating it, but maybe it's not. I know I didn't really understand what the role was until I've been here for a little while. So I think guidance and letting them respond to the guidance would be a good approach. I don't want to ask people for their input at this point.
Okay.
Appointing authorities, except for a few towns, I'm not sure they would be very helpful.
And the other thing I would offer right now is that I have already, even though I expect to stay on until, through the opening of the new school and what would be the natural end of that appointment here, I have already let people know that start thinking about who else from Concord might be interested and would take this as an active and serious appointment, not, something that you show up a couple of meetings into a town meeting and that's all. Because feedback from others in Concord is that I am, as the representative of this district for Concord, that I am more present, more visible, and have therefore made the school more visible to my community. By taking the opportunity to meet with other committees, the parent teacher group, that kind of stuff, but also through our monthly committee, we have a sharing breakfast once a month.
Who has a sharing breakfast?
Sharing breakfast, Concord has,
All the chairs.
all the chairs of every committee get together for a 1-hour meeting once a month. And it's a 7:30 in the morning meeting, it's over at 8:30. And since there's only one of me, I hold the record for attendance at the chair's breakfast meeting.
But it's an informal meeting, not with
It's-
selectmen and whatnot.
There's a selectman there, there's a finance committee there, there's a public works committee there, there's one person from each of the sort of regular standing committees.
Okay.
Every month, you get about 3 minutes apiece to talk about what's going on in your committee, and then other committees have the opportunity to check in with you later.
Jeff, and then Ford, Adam's up first.
Okay, so, coming from a very long-term perspective and seeing lots of choices on school committee members and trying to be just a little bit blunt on this, the problems of communities appointing school members, the problems I put into two categories: neglect and malice. Neglect meaning we just don't care that much, let's not try to waste our time trying to find somebody or whatnot, it's just not that important. That's the more people fall into that category. And then there's malice, we don't like where this is going, so let's choose somebody to disrupt the process. With malice, there's not a lot you can do, because if there's a political player whose primary goal is to disrupt the process, then having a nice conversation isn't going to generally help you out much. But on the neglect end, there's probably a lot we can do in terms of explaining why it's important. The question is, beyond, once you create the documents, the question will be, what process do we do to take these documents and to get the various people to take it seriously? And that has to be a forever ongoing exercise, because there's churn, and the people who understand you leave and other people come in. Now, some communities have historically been very attentive and extremely good at spending a lot of time choosing people, and others have not. And it would be good if we can get them all into the category of understanding the needs, thinking it through, and us having a process, ongoing communication, so that when new people come in, we won't lose all the historical knowledge about it. So the documents are great, we've had documents before, but what we haven't done is have some sort of process by which we share this information with them, a more formal process, and continue sharing and continue having a conversation with them about what they should do. That's the piece that has to be put in place if you want this to be successful, once you have your documents created and agreed.
Ford, thank you.
Yeah, I think what's important to note, as you remember, the charge of this committee is we're a subcommittee that is going to do just what Sue stated. We're going to come back with documents or a document outlining what we as a subcommittee think is the way to go. But then there's going to be a more lively discussion, as exemplified by you both this evening, as to what else should be in, what should be taken out. So it's a working document. It's not a final document. It's a working document that's going to have just what you're talking about. Then we're going to take that, go back, do some more work on it, then bring it back to you. So this is a process that we're going to go through. We're just going to start it, and then you all are going to help us complete it. So what both you and Carrie have said is we're going to have this discussion again, and you're going to bring that information back to us, and then you may even suggest that we go to your towns or some of the towns that have a process and talk to them about what they think it should be. So a final document will be one that we all work on.
Sue and then Jeff.
I anticipate too that most of our focus will be on the process over time, over the entire 3-year term of a school committee member. The documents, it's a dangerous word, I think, because it seems like you put it on paper and you put it away, and that's what often happens. But I anticipate the documentation will be just a description of the process and how we're going to, what's the word I want, keep monitoring. Right. Monitor.
And a living document, that's what I mean.
Yes.
It's a living document that it's used continuously. Jeff, I'm sorry.
Okay, just, don't be sorry, nothing to be sorry for. So part of what you're going to do will be a suggestion of how to move forward with our communities such that they will eliminate neglect in choosing personnel. That's part of your suggestion is going to cover that.
They have to have buy-in, otherwise they're going to ignore you, so.
Well, sometimes though, we could converse with them more to get the buy-in instead of, hoping for the best. And we've done too much hoping for the best, and sometimes we get really lucky, and sometimes we don't.
Anything else? Anything else, Sue? Thanks very much. It really is it's an important piece of work that you're doing, and look forward to hearing the next phase that you've worked on. So thank you, and thank you all the people who serve on the committee. Secretary's report begins on page 19, which are the draft minutes of the regular meeting on January 16th, as well as the joint meeting on January 16th. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So you're going to try to approve both at once?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the motion is to approve the two sets of draft minutes as presented.
So moved.
Jennifer, okay. Any additions or corrections or whatever? Amendments, okay. All in favor? 9 didn't, all opposed and abstained.
I was not at one of you.
Right, okay.
So you're abstaining, so you have to abstain from both.
You voted for both, so I'm saying that you
The
voted.
motion is for both. So
That's what it passes
it's
anyway.
901. I've been told there's not a need to enter into executive session for B and C, so we won't have executive session to approve the minutes of the previous executive session. We'll do that whenever we have the next executive session. So do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Even though I might have said something else.
No, it's all you say,
To get rid of blank passes.
Right. He's on 4750.
Do we have a second? I guess we did. Did you get it? Okay. All in favor? All opposed? 10-0, unanimous. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, I like the numbers.
And the communities that appointed us are the exceptional list.
In my own mind, I read the school meeting every year. That was 19 years. Last year, this is my 19th year.